Imagine you went into surgery to get your foot amputated and the doctor cut off the wrong foot. Or the anesthesia didn't work and you were awake for the whole thing. Or if the doctor performing the surgery killed 3 different people. Yes, there was a surgery with a 300% death rate. Look, medicine is hard, and doctors don't always get it right. Hell, you've probably had a misdiagnosis at some point in your life. It happens. But some medical mistakes are worse than others. Some of them will make your jaw drop. So in this video, let's take a look at some of the absolute worst medical mistakes ever made. This could get ugly. According to the book Medical Error Reduction and Prevention, around 400,000 hospitalized patients experience some type of preventable harm every year. In fact, medical errors in hospitals and clinics result in about 100,000 yearly deaths. These errors include diagnostic, medication, and surgical failures. The authors write, quote, "Errors, no matter the nomenclature, typically occur from a convergence of multiple contributing factors." Meaning it's not always some incompetent doctor screwing something up, there's usually several different factors that come together to cause it. Which, considering how huge and cumbersome our healthcare system is, I think it's kind of easy to see how that could happen. In fact, I think some context is necessary here. I actually looked up how many people go to the hospital in the US every year, and according to the United States Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, it's 36 million people. That's an error rate of 1.1%. So, look, despite what you see in this video, go to the hospital if you're sick, guys. Yeah, there's a reason why these stories are noteworthy, and thankfully it's not because it's common. It's also noteworthy because, and this needs to be said right up front, some of this is gruesome. This video might not appeal to everyone in my audience, but if you are the type of person who really wants to know the exact technique Victorian doctors used to amputate a leg in less than 30 seconds, welcome. I mean, you did click on a video called The Worst Medical Mistakes of All Time, so you knew what you were getting into. You just can't have a list of medical mistakes without the story of Dr. Robert Liston. Dr. Robert Liston was a surgeon in 19th century London who was actually considered one of the best surgeons of his time. This wasn't because he had the best bedside manner or got the best outcome. It's because he was fast. Yeah, this was before anesthetics. If you needed to get something cut out of you, you were awake for the whole thing. No numbing. It didn't exist. You might get a swig of whiskey if you're lucky. You laid there on a table with a team of doctors around you, most of whom were there to just hold you down. And behind those doctors were rows and rows of spectators, watching you squirm as the doctor slices you open, because these were usually done in surgical theaters. Yeah, they didn't have video back then where they could just record something and learn, how to do these surgeries through video. They had to actually be there for a surgery and watch it in order to learn how to do surgery. So there were just like crowds of people as this is happening. Seriously, everything about Victorian surgery sounds like an actual nightmare. Every time I talk about this, I am so thankful that I live when I do. So like today, if you needed a tumor removed, that would suck. Nobody would want that, but most people would do it, no question, right? But back then, you might just want to take your chances with a tumor. The one thing you wanted in a surgeon was for that guy to be fast. You wanted the horror of this thing to be as short as possible so you can get on with the business of, dying of infection usually. But that's exactly why Robert Liston was so popular. He was often called the fastest knife in the West End, and he was famously able to do an above-the-knee amputation in less than 30 seconds. Okay, so what he would do is he would come up under the leg like this, with the knife pointed back at himself, and then in one smooth motion would just whip the knife around 360 degrees. He would then make a U-shaped cut in the skin that he would later fold over the bone after, sawing the bone into, and then he tied up the major arteries and sutured up the stump. 30 seconds. Probably took me longer to explain it. And look, he was very skilled at this and saved a lot of lives because a fast surgery also meant less blood loss as well. He also advocated for post-operative care and was one of the first surgeons to use ether to actually anesthetize the patient. So he really was all about reducing suffering. Unfortunately, one of the things he's most known for is this one surgery. As the story goes, during one particular surgery, he did that whipping the knife around thing that he always did, but the assistant that was working with him wasn't quite ready, so he accidentally took off 3 of the assistant's fingers. And maybe because he was so flustered after the commotion that happened after that, he accidentally sliced through a bystander's coat. This probably didn't wind up being one of those 30-second jobs, but he got through it, and the patient and his assistant went away to recover. Unfortunately, the patient developed an infection that led to gangrene, and he later died, which wasn't that uncommon back then. But as if that wasn't bad enough, his assistant cut by the same knife that caused the infection in the patient, also got gangrene and died. But the real kicker is that bystander whose coat got slashed died of fright. I guess after seeing the other two people get hacked to pieces, seeing that knife coming at him was just a little too much. But yeah, apparently he went into shock and his heart stopped. And yeah, it's been called the only surgery in history to have a 300% fatality rate. Oh, and just one more thing. There was also a surgery where he got so crazy with the knife that he accidentally sliced off a patient's testicle. But at least that guy survived. Sherman Sizemore was a Baptist minister and a former coal miner who was admitted to Raleigh General Hospital in Beckley, West Virginia on January 19, 2006 due to abdominal pain. After failing to diagnose the problem, the doctors decided to perform an exploratory surgery. So they wheel him into the operating room and the anesthesiologist gets to work. And the thing about surgical anesthesia, aside from it being awesome, is that it comes in two parts. So there's the drug that knocks you out, stuff like propofol, but there's also a paralytic agent to keep your muscles from twitching during surgery. But unfortunately for Sherman Sizemore, the anesthesia assistant gave him the paralytic, but not the sleepy time stuff. Meaning when they got to cutting, he was lying there perfectly still, but he was wide awake. The doctors eventually realized this when they saw his vital signs showing signs of stress, and they were able to knock him out, but not before operating on him for 16 minutes. Now, I want to make some kind of crack about how he got to have his surgery, old school style without the anesthesia, but the fact of the matter is, this experience might have been even worse. Because unlike old school surgeries, the doctors were just, taking their time, thinking he wasn't feeling anything. Plus being paralyzed and unable to tell the doctors what's happening, it's a whole other level of horror. His family said he suffered excruciating discomfort. But he was never quite the same afterwards. He was also apparently tormented by doubts about whether his memories of it were real or not. The family eventually would sue the hospital when, sadly, Mr. Sizemore took his own life. Bob East was a 64-year-old retired photographer in Miami who developed a type of facial cancer in 1985. He went in for surgery to remove the tumor at Jackson Memorial Hospital, and it was going to be a pretty extensive surgery that would require opening up and replacing a section of his skull. He was also going to lose an eye in the surgery, which I imagine is a pretty big blow to a photographer, but maybe as a way to find a silver lining, he opted to donate the eye to research. So part of this surgery, and I don't know how common this kind of thing is, maybe a surgeon can tell me in the comments, but part of the surgery is that they removed some of the spinal fluid around the brain before the surgery, and then afterwards they re-injected it into a spinal column just to make sure that there weren't any leaks in the protective membrane around the brain. The meninges is what it's called. And in Bob's case, the surgery seemed to go well. Afterwards, he was still unconscious and recuperating, but when the ophthalmologist came in afterwards to pick up the eye, he noticed something was wrong. It was in the wrong container. Yeah, before the surgery, he came in and gave the team a container to put the eye in, and that container was filled with a preservative called glutaraldehyde, which is familiar to formaldehyde. But this was not the same container the eye was in. This was a different container, and it wasn't filled with toxic preservative. It was filled with spinal fluid. Yeah, somehow during this surgery, the two containers got confused. So instead of pumping his own spinal fluid back into his spine, they basically filled him with embalming fluid. In hindsight, the anesthesiologist said he knew that something was wrong immediately after the injection because Bob's blood pressure dropped and his heart rate slowed down. As a result of this, Bob East went into a coma. 3 days later, doctors performed a brain scan and they found no activity, meaning he was functionally brain dead. His family chose to disconnect his life support systems, and he died on March 6, 1985. His family later sued for medical malpractice, which you might as well just assume that in all of these stories that there was some kind of a lawsuit involved. Enrique Ruiz suffered from lung problems that required the use of a breathing tube, and in 2012 he went to the Lincoln Hospital in the Bronx to get his temporary breathing tube replaced. This was a fairly minor procedure that just required him to be put under while the surgeon reworked his tracheostomy so that a more permanent tube could be inserted. But this surgery had an unexpected side effect. He caught on fire. Dr. Jay Yellen was a surgeon on duty, and he was using an electronic scalpel, which reduces the amount of bleeding, which is obviously a good thing, but it also sets off sparks. Right next to an oxygen hose. You can imagine what happened next. There was a minor explosion that engulfed his chest and neck, giving him second-degree burns. Luckily, he was unconscious for that whole thing, but he still had to recover from second-degree burns, but he did recover. This one lived. He's alive! Unfortunately, this is not that rare of an occurrence. Between 550 and 650 surgical fires happen in the US every year, according to the FDA. They tend to happen when 3 elements are present: an ignition source, like a laser or electrosurgical tool, a fuel source, like drapes or alcohol-based preparations, and an oxidizer, like nitrous oxide or oxygen. Ruiz ended up going to another hospital for recovery, but he did tell CBS News, quote, "I don't think anyone should get burned." Yeah, I think that's a pretty reasonable request. In 2003, 17-year-old Jessica Santillan was in critical condition in the pediatric intensive care unit at Duke University Hospital in Durham, North Carolina. She had just undergone a 4-hour heart-lung transplant, which is traumatic enough, but this surgery was riddled with complications. Her body was rejecting the organs, everything was going wrong. The reason everything was going wrong was because the heart and lungs she received were the wrong blood type. This is pretty basic stuff we've known about for a long time. I'm sure many of you watching this know about certain blood types and how they don't mix and whatnot. You might not know all the details. That's fine. Basically, different types of blood cells have different types of proteins on the surface called antigens. And if, say, your body has like A positive blood and you receive type B negative blood, those different antigens will activate your immune system. So your immune system will just attack the bad blood. Plus you get all the inflammation and knock-on effects that causes. And if you've got an organ from the wrong blood type, your immune system will attack that organ. It'll basically just dissolve in your body. Luckily, like I said, this is stuff that's been known for a very long time. Testing for blood compatibility is very easy and cheap, and there are well-established procedures and protocols around blood transfusions that prevent this kind of thing from happening. There is no excuse for this to happen. Thomas Murray, the president of the medical ethics think tank the Hastings Center, commented on this incident saying, quote, "This particular incident is as horrendous an error as one can imagine. I was quite shocked to know that there were not multiple independent checks of things as critical as blood type before the organs were even accepted for transplant. Luckily, doctors found new organs that were the right blood type and size, and just to be sure, they had 3 different doctors independently check that the organs matched." So Santillan underwent a second transplant operation, but sadly the damage had been done. Her body was just too weak after not only recovering from the surgery, but then the immune system reaction. She survived for a couple of days, but eventually did unfortunately pass away. In November 2007, an 82-year-old woman was admitted to the Rhode Island hospital with a brain bleed. She was bleeding between her brain and her skull, and the doctors performed an operation to stop the bleeding. It was only after they got in there that they realized, small problem, they were on the wrong side of her head. They quickly sewed her up and went to work on the correct side. Luckily, they were able to fix the problem. She ended up being okay. Probably had a weird hairstyle for a while. And that would be the end of the story, except that this wasn't the first time that it happened in this hospital. It also wasn't the second time it had happened in that hospital. It was, in fact, the 3rd time that it happened in the same hospital in the same year. And there was actually a 4th time that it happened in the previous 5 years. Yeah, there was a different one in February 2007. A different doctor performed neurosurgery on the wrong side of a patient's head. That patient ended up being okay too. But one patient did die in August of that year after a different 3rd doctor performed a brain surgery on the wrong side of her head. For the November case, the hospital ended up paying $50,000 and got reprimanded by the Department of Health. Come on, guys, knowing your left from right, it's not like it's brain surgery. Except it's actually brain surgery.
What's the difference between a doctor and a brain surgeon? One's not exactly brain surgery, the other is brain surgery.
So look, even with the number of medical mistakes that we have today, it is still the best time in human history to get sick or injured. So do it now! Yeah, like I was saying at the beginning, back in the old days, a trip to the hospital was likely the last trip that you took. Like, I focused earlier on, how nightmarish the surgeries were because of the lack of anesthesia and everything, but they were also deadly, with a very high number of people coming down with gangrene and sepsis. Back then, surgery really was considered like a last resort. Like, you really had to weigh out the probability of whether or not the surgery would kill you faster than the disease or injury you had. Yeah, one of the things that I read during that Robert Liston bit was that when anesthesia did come along, many surgeons rejected it because they believed that pain was the way the body healed itself. Like, they thought that if you didn't feel it, you wouldn't heal as well. Imagine that conversation. Yeah, I heard about some stuff that they use now that makes the surgery painless. Will you be using that? You don't heal as well if you don't feel it. What? You can't heal if you don't feel. I don't think that's right. Well, it rhymes, so. The point is, mistakes like this are thankfully rare, but they do still happen, and the medical community is constantly working to improve their conditions to keep them from happening. Things like improving communication between doctors between shifts, improving communication between doctors and patients, improving hygiene at hospitals. I mean, pretty basic stuff at this point. But like I said at the beginning, these mistakes are rarely just the work of one person. It's usually a breakdown in these very simple processes. So yeah, improving those basic things can prevent thousands of unnecessary deaths. They also encourage patients to get second opinions when they're uncertain about symptoms or treatments. Because ultimately, it's your body, and it's your job as a patient to protect yourself and your health, which is actually true in a lot of parts of our lives. Like protecting yourself when you're online, for example. So hey, it's the holidays. You might have some travel plans in the next few weeks, meaning you could probably find yourself on somebody else's Wi-Fi. Somebody else's dirty, unprotected Wi-Fi. You don't know where that thing's been? Well, just like any time when you're traveling, it's good to protect your data with NordVPN. So just a quick example, you guys know, I do a lot of writing, I research a lot of random topics, so I find it's probably wise when I'm visiting the in-laws to not do a web search like, I don't know, how to dispose of a dead body. Just in case someone out there might be listening in on their internet. You don't want the feds to show up in your in-laws' front door. Or maybe you do, I don't know your in-laws. There are other reasons too, like have you ever noticed you have trouble checking your bank account when traveling? That's because the site sees someone trying to log in from some other place than you normally log in from. So you usually have to do the whole two-factor authentication dance, which is annoying. Necessary, but annoying. Well, with NordVPN, you can just set your private network to be the same IP address as your home. And as far as the bank is concerned, you're just home, sitting on your couch, pounding down Pringles, probably watching Overboard. Wondering if this is aged very well? Or you could be watching something else. But the fact of the matter is, you could be watching literally anything because a lot of these movies aren't available on streaming services in the States. They are available in other places of the world. And NordVPN, you can use that to make it look like you're logging in from there. Your hunger for entertainment knows no borders with NordVPN. But obviously there are a lot more serious threats like ransomware attacks, malware, phishing, all attempts to capture your personal data, and NordVPN has an answer for all those things. It even has dark web monitoring, so it can help you keep track of your information and keep it off of databases on the dark web. So if you want to get started, just go to nordvpn.com/Joe Scott, where you can get 4 months for free when you sign up for a 2-year plan, and they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if it turns out you don't like it, you've got nothing to lose. Actually, I take it back. You got a lot to lose, but NordVPN can protect it. So one more time, that's nordvpn.com/Joe Scott. You get 4 months free, and you'll be able to search whatever you want at your in-laws. Links down below. All right, thanks a lot for watching, and if this is your first time here, I'll put a link up here for one that I did a while back about how we really don't know how anesthesia works. Kind of a terrifying thought, but it's a pretty interesting video, kind of ties into what we're doing here. Or, just look at any of the other videos if you're on your web browser that YouTube might be sharing that have my face on them. Just give them a click, and if you do enjoy them, I invite you to subscribe. I come back with videos every Monday. I think that's it for today. You guys go out there, have an eye-opening rest of the week. Stay safe, and I'll see you next Monday. Love you guys. Take care.